Hello, everybody. Most of you very familiar faces by now, after almost 3 years of seeing each other. But for those very few of you who don't know me yet, this is my name. This is me. I am Christine, Impact Measurement and Management Lead at Impact Hub Global. And I was tasked with this very last and important keynote speech for us, telling a little bit from the practitioner point of view what we have learned from Coral, so from all of you ESRs that are here as well, and from all of the academic partners that are here. But before I then go into the learning, what I know people want to know is a little bit more about Impact Hub. So here's like 3 main points that we'll go through very quickly. But before I start explaining who we are, I wanted to see all of you in the room, who of you has entered an Impact Hub before in your lives? So we have 3 that did not. Which Impact Hubs did you go into? Let me hear a few places. Athens, everybody. Bogota, really? Cool. Amsterdam, Florence, cool. Vienna, Odessa. Mikkel, do you want to say all of the Impact Hubs you have entered? Just say 3. Your 3 top Impact Hubs. Nice. Very cool. Yes. And so, for those 3 of you who have not ever been in an Impact Hub before, and also for the benefit of the rest of you, what Impact Hub is, or how we describe ourselves lately, is that we are a locally rooted global network of entrepreneurial communities for impact at scale. So you have seen, the specific cases of an Impact Hub, but then as a network, as a whole, there's about 120 locations now in over 60 countries. I'm saying about 120 locations because obviously some Impact Hubs close down, some new open quite frequently, so there's never one year where the number of Impact Hubs stays the same. So just to keep that in mind. I always forget this. There's 3 main points of what we do, and I'm going to go a little bit down here. We are very much about community, as though many of you will have seen in your research as well. I mean, the word community comes up so incredibly often, but it's definitely very much at the heart of the Impact Hub network and of every single Impact Hub as well. And so it's about really creating this community that is an enabling environment for impact makers being anybody that wants to make a positive change in the world, put it that way. Then we're very much about providing meaningful content, so sharing content, which can be happening through programs as well, so through acceleration programs or any other types of funded programs. There can be EU programs or private funders. And then it's about having inspiring spaces. So really starting from really more the physical sort of space, now also moving into a broader concept of space that isn't necessarily physical. And those are 3 points that really bring together any Impact Hub on the planet and under which all of them work. One quick one I wanted to mention is as well that in the so-called Ambition 2030 that we work under, we have defined diversity, equity and inclusion and climate action as our 2 main focus areas. So really any Impact Hub does sort of target either one of these 2 points specifically in their work. So they might not always put it out there that much, but there's work like going on in the background with regards to these two topics. All right. And then, as a network, here are examples of 4 points that we really try to explain the role that we play, is that we try to remove barriers to entry in the social innovation world. We try to build a pipeline of impactful entrepreneurial innovations. We connect the entrepreneurial innovation with institutional and corporate efforts. And we serve as a platform to scale successful innovations. Now, just putting this one up here so that we can get a grasp of the size. In these 120 locations, we have to say that it's mostly, predominantly at this moment, urban impact hubs. And I think that's an important one, and also in terms of preparing for what I can tell you about what we learn as Impact Hub from Coral. It's, for us at the moment, it's a very much urban-based network. The first Impact Hub was born in London in 2005, so it's almost 20 years ago. The original Impact Hub actually does not exist anymore, which was which it just happens, you know, it's a network. People decide to do different things and they move on. But yeah, just so we know, this is not a neo-corporate way of co-working. It is, you know, the network was born bottom up from one impact hub where other people came, saw, liked what they saw, and wanted to bring the same thing to their cities. And when they arrived at about 8 impact hubs, they decided that they wanted to constitute a sort of a network, and just continued growing. And we continue growing as we speak as well. The only thing that has changed, and I think to make clear as well what the role of Impact Hub Global is, so who I work with and who Mikkel works with as well. We, in 2015, I believe, actually got the mandate by the network to cover a couple of key areas that are important for the network to be able to do their work better and together. So the network is set up as an association, and as such, each impact hub has one vote, and decisions are made by voting in annual meetings, and that is how you vote. And so there it was decided that we needed a sort of a central function that is able to cover aspects of, for example, the branding, the governance of the network, because as it grew, it just became more and more complicated. And so that's how today we're still here, and there's Impact Hub Global that actually works in service of the network based on the needs of the network. So rather than looking at, franchising models where you then go and say, okay, the central aspect sort of decides top-down what's happening, really it's sort of the other way around for us. So we are in service of what the network decides they find the most important at any given point. And if we now go into a little bit more of the European detail, because in the end we are here because of a European project, you can see that in Europe we are quite Impact Hub heavy, if you will. But again, if you look at the map, you see very few sort of non-central places. And I just wanted to mention, though, 2 examples, which are not on the slide, but I'm going to see how I can do this. Or maybe we're good in geography, maybe we can, is there a laser? Oh. Hang on, this on top. Oh, yes, great. So we have Impact Hub Inverness up here, serving also the Scottish Highlands and Islands. So that's like one of the areas that we could definitely call peripheral, and Impact Hub Inverness is also a really interesting example because They do a lot of community work, and they've also just sort of entered into this great project of a community-led wind farm, community-led and community-owned. And then there's another example in Norway, which is this one here, which is Impact Hub Agder, which is in, you see, in the south of Norway, but it's like a peripheral area, and it's really, Agder is actually the name of a county, and then the city itself is Arendal, and so it's a city of 45,000 people more or less, and so Impact Hub Agder, actually in its name already, you can see that they are actually they're looking at the whole periphery around the city as well. So these are the two European examples of a little bit more peripheral work, but in general, the network does have an increasing interest in peripheral areas, in rural areas. There's a couple of impact hubs, like Impact Hub Athens as well, that work on projects with rural areas. So while they, for example, don't set up an impact hub in a rural or peripheral area, they do have links to it. And there's Impact Hub Global. We're also involved in an Erasmus Youth project that is called Place Out, that sort of investigates youth in rural and peripheral areas in 4 areas. And let me just double check which Greek area is involved. I think it's Halki, that one. Yeah, so there's definitely a few pieces in terms of rurality, peripheral areas, and Impact Hub where we are getting to the point where that interests as well. Great, so that's, I guess, Impact Hub in a nutshell. Now, because I did have a little slide here that said, how did we get here? Referring to how did we actually get into this Coral consortium. But all of the information that I could get was from our EU cluster manager, basically, who was like, I think Politecnico di Milano brought us in, and then Vasilis contacted our colleague Marina, and that was it. Vasilis, is that about right? So that's how Impact Hub got into the consortium, and how we now, for the benefit as well of those of you who aren't actually in the consortium, is hosting also one of the ESRs. And that's why, sometimes I look at Mikkel because he's our ESR, and he's a much more long-standing member of the Impact Hub community than I am myself. So if you have any questions with regards to Impact Hub, ask him. Questions on Impact Hub pre-2019? Yeah. See, so there you go. All of the fun questions in terms of governance and the painful process, I understand this was. We can ask Mikkel at the end in the question round as well. So that's quite great. Right. But seeing as we now know how we got here, just wanted to go quickly into how we learn from Coral, but also more generally, I guess, from research projects. I think the 2 main points are these here, very simply put. One piece really is the wealth of new knowledge. And I think Martin very nicely mentioned a few of the points as well, that from the point of view of Impact Hub really is sort of, is the same. It's the fact that we're in a project where we have 15 ESRs studying the same topic from different points of views, I think is something that is incredibly full of learning, even though not everything is going to be directly applicable to, say, for example, Impact Hub. But the fact that we can then take this knowledge, bring it back to the network, and being able to, at least maybe for some of the Impact Hubs where it is applicable, give them a little bit more of additional knowledge, a different viewpoint is really, really incredibly helpful. And so I think that is by gaining this new knowledge that you couldn't necessarily gain by yourself, particularly as a practitioner. Because yes, you could set up your own research arm, but number one, it's not that easy. It's very costly, time intensive, and then number two as well, I think the other piece that is so important about this and really valuable is that this is like uninterested research. As soon as you do in-house research, your interests automatically will come in one way or another, and you will want to show the positive side of it. Although, as we heard yesterday, apparently, this is an issue here as well, because we try to showcase only positive examples. So I guess there's a little bit of that in general as well, but I think when you have in-house research from practitioner, the risk is higher, particularly when you then get funds from private funders and they expect a certain outcome. So I think that's something to mention as well. And then it's actually the second piece is about really better understanding the way that research projects work, the way that a consortium that is by no means a small consortium like Coral works, and the way that you navigate EU projects. And I think that's always something in the EU context for any practitioner too. That is a really, really important piece of knowledge, because there are so many different EU projects out there that you could leverage, and by understanding a little bit better how the mechanisms work, you'll just be able to make use of that tool much more. So that's how we have learned. Now, what is it that all of you have taught us? What is it that we have learned? And here, it's not just 2 points, but it's actually 3 points. And it's ongoing thinking involved in these as well. Number one is is really all about all of the differences between urban and rural co-working, where at some point then I always come back to the question, well, is there really that much of a difference? Because sometimes I think it's because everything is context-based, both in the rural areas and in the urban areas. You sometimes actually find similarities between the urban and the rural co-working that you might not have expected. So I think those differences are something really, really interesting to draw out, and that are connected particularly with the community building aspect as well. And as I said, very much part of Impact Hub's DNA, everything about community building, really giving a space and a home, I guess, for those impact makers that want to make a difference in the world, where thinking about how there are differences and how quite a few of you have sort of noted that as an aspect in your research. In the end, I do think what it comes down to still, and in most impact hubs, and again, I think that there is something to be said about every single impact hub is its own entity as well, and lives within a different context. So every single impact hub has a slightly different way of approaching their community building. But that whole idea of giving a home to people, making them feel welcome, and having this opportunity to sort of come together is something that happens in the urban just like it does in the rural, in contexts like for Impact Hub. In other types of co-working, that might not be the case, but I found actually that the way that community is talked about, definitely for quite a few of the rural impact hubs, of the urban impact hubs, is just the same as in some cases of your research, a rural impact hub would talk about. So I found that was quite interesting in terms of, is there actually that much of difference? In other cases, for sure, it's gonna be different. But even thinking of what Gary said yesterday about one of the hubs where you had one entrepreneur that sort of, needed to have a space for himself to work, so that it was better for his and his wife's mental health if he wasn't always at home. I think that's, for example, exactly the way Impact Hub was born, the first Impact Hub. That there was I think a group of 3 or 4 people that wanted a space, and that's how it started. And so I think it's really interesting to see, yes, that there are those similarities out there as well. Although it's also quite clear that because we have to study the rural co-working much more, that one would start with the differences before then drawing out the similarities. So I think these are some pieces that have been then particularly have now been updated with what I've heard yesterday and today as well again. Yes, and finally, really important piece, as Impact Hub is a business, is actually like, and that is where the difference does come in, is the feasibility of business models. So in the rural areas, definitely the business model, as you said as well this morning, has to be reviewed, and it's quite different, and it's not going to be feasible in most cases that you will be able to cover a whole bunch of your costs through membership, for example. And I did want to bring you a number there, though, from Impact Hub, because in 2023, for example, in the entire network, about 40% of revenue came from space and membership across the entire network. And for the European hubs, that's more or less the same. So that's quite a big chunk, I would say, if you look at the urban context. And that is unlikely to be possible in the rural context, but at the same time, I actually think that's not a problem. It's just about revisiting those sorts of business model and really revisiting that idea, as Martin said as well, not paying rent, because there's so many underused spaces, and just really being able to access that underused space, entering into much more public-private partnerships, and really being able to just, in a sense, cut costs, which then also allows you to survive in a different way with a different business model. And I think that is generally also really interesting, and something that even the urban impact hubs could learn from. And in some cases, impact hubs already do this sort of thing also in cities, and we have various impact hubs that don't pay rent and that have gotten their access to their space through municipalities, etc. But I think it's definitely also something to think about in terms of maybe needing to give a little less value to the need of creating revenue through space. Yes, definitely providing space, because that is fundamental, I believe, as well, to the community aspect. Because if you don't provide them with a space, how are people going to feel like a community? It's going to be much more difficult. But yeah, at the same time, really seeing it as one of those big pieces of income might just not necessarily be necessary. At the same time, also though, not getting into the trap of being completely dependent on donor funding. I think Maria said this really well also this morning, this whole issue, and it's something that Impact Hub also suffers from, just to be clear as well, that you get into this spiral almost of programs. And I think that sort of risk might, it has to be handled as well within a business model, and it has to actually be taken into account in the business model then more clearly. How much of your work can you live with being funded by projects, and where is it just too much so that you can't move into a strategic direction? And I think that was another important piece that comes out of it, and where definitely also all of the examples that you have collected are, for example, really, really useful for impact hubs to learn about, because it's just seeing what others do and how others do it. Yes, so that was like my third one, a quick one. And now I actually wanted to throw the question back at all of you guys, because I really wanted to know, what do all of you think, people now that are almost done with their PhDs, and our academic partners who are long-term experts, what do you think that practitioners like us should learn from Coral? Let's see. Democracy.
In a lot of senses. Sociocracy, consensus, heterarchy, direct democracy, liquid democracy, conviction voting, value distribution, equality in participation in decision making, transparency, openness, sharing, mutualism, community, and much more. Thank you.
Does anybody? Oh,
Thinking maybe also a common thing that practitioners learn from research is more on the methodology part. For example, do impact assessment, then how quantitatively or qualitatively there's a solid method to measure this impact. And I think MSCA is doing, for example, this social network analysis, mixed method, always very strong. So yeah, I think others also have our own like different methods. So that could be a useful tool, and that can be developed from like a research process into a like workshop process with practitioners.
very cool. Thank you.
Well, ladies first. Yeah, I think also since you are also human beings, it might be still interesting. Yeah, to get inspired or to have the chance through our researches and the contacts we met to different case studies, let's say, to also get an insight of what there is out there, which is also people similar maybe in what they try to do, but doing it in a different way or facing different challenges that maybe one or the other could still have to face in the future. So I hope that that will also contribute a bit to a better overview for you.
Thank you. Certainly.
There are probably a couple of points, but I think a key point is to learn about barriers being not singular barriers at singular cases. I mean, you're already a project with, I mean, how many locations? I forgot the number. So you have the cross perspective, and for us, it's always the question: where do we reach more systemic problems that we really have trouble to transcend? And I think some of these systemic problems have been voiced today. I think it's also our obligation to make them visible and as researchers present the potential of what we observe, but also present the problems and downsides that go along with this potential. So exploitation, living without future security, like very limited pension security and stuff like that. And the projects that are happening, they are just happening because we have those fantastic people who don't care, who so strongly believe in that they are on the right track that they still do it. And this is a very limited number of people who can afford this, or maybe also are in personal situations that allows for this. So it's really often the case. It's like single people or people with broken families, because they invest so much of their time into their work by heart, that there is no time for family, for kids whatsoever. So that's really often the case. Sorry for that. Not provoked by us, I hope. Yeah, but I think that's the thing I think you can learn is that, yeah, you're not alone. You're reaching systemic borders, and we're providing kind of community that can make those borders visible, also make it visible to politicians, and try to scale up such great examples like what Martin and his team fought for years, to make it possible that you have the backup from local policies, local politics, local politicians. If we would be able to scale that up to the regional scale, you're working on that, then to the national scale, to the European scale. So it's probably good to start at local scale, but we have to scale it up. And yeah, I don't know if this is, if this makes you happy. Probably not, but it might be easier to live with these barriers if we help you to realize that it's not that you're doing not sufficiently, or that you're lacking competences also. It's a systemic problem of our today's society and today's economic system, and we can make you visible with these problems, and we can make proposals and suggestions, and that would be also my request to all of us, to try and discover those problems, and not just describe a nice case, but ask yourself the question, why was it so difficult to find those cases? Why are there so little? What can we do to help future similar cases to flourish, to grow? Where are the systemic problems, and what can we do to transcend these problems? And we need the dialogue with you, and in the medium term, I hope so, not even only in the long run, we can change something. Long comment, sorry.
But this was very inspirational now in the end. Who else has something to share?
Okay. And I think it would be useful also to talk about the different communities, because everyone talks about community, but we found out also through the research we did, through the literature, that there is many ways to stay together that not necessarily bring to make the community. So what about, you know, the thing that many people pay the fees for the co-working spaces, and they're just users. Maybe they stay in the same place for a few hours or for 1 week, etc. This is called community, but is it a community, for example? And I would say that sometimes one of the things that practitioners should learn is exactly what is a community, and what are the nuances that, you know, like make the difference between how people stay together. And we can call also that people stay together without using the word community. We can also use like other ways, clients, or I don't know, or citizens, or whatever. So I would say that we also debunked this concept of community, and I would say that is profitable also for practitioners that, of course, they want to develop their models of collaborative workspaces.
And you actually reminded me of a point there with the communities. That's because it is, yeah, I think how we use the word community at Impact Hub. There's the direct community that is within your Impact Hub, right? And that isn't just the user of the space, because I actually think in that case, user is a really useful term for it. Like, you can be a member that is a community member, or you can be a member that is a user. If you only come in to work and you use it as the pure co-working space in the Rigas sense and the WeWork sense. Whereas the other community member is like the active community member, and you actually go and you propose activities, you give your time within the community as well, and so that's something that at Impact Hub as well, that's what is seen as a community member as well, somebody who brings in new ideas as well, who, you know, at the very limit at least participates in things like really cool things that happen, sexy salads and all that sort of stuff, which is simply a different way of calling having a joint lunch and making a big bowl of salad and chatting over it. Yeah. And so that is there, but also lately we now have created sort of an onion to explain our way of community, because it does grow, because you don't have to be a member to actually be part of the community and sort of bring something to it. And so particularly, you know, things like people that are mentors in programs are also community members, although they might not always live in the space, but they come in and they give something to the community. And so there's now like this sort of onion model that we call, where we have like different pieces of a community that ends up then not just being like the reach of anybody who just sees anything on on Instagram, which that's not really a community member anymore, but it's just shown in this sort of onion model. So definitely a really good point, and I had forgotten that piece to mention that before, so thank you for reminding us, Costantino. Maria, I'm just going to go over to Colm and then I'm going to come to you.
I think one thing that as Coral that we've done as researchers, let's say, both ESRs and supervisors, I think, you know, whatever methodological approaches, whatever conceptual approaches, we've found a lot of concrete examples of rural collaborative workspaces. Mainly just successful cases, and obviously there's a lot of cases that, let's say, aren't successful or have closed down or don't do whatever, but we have found many, many examples of an emerging thing that was an emerging thing, let's say, when we started out. So whether you're in Germany, whether you're in Ireland, whether you're in Greece, Italy, whatever, I mean, it is something that exists, and we've provided a lot of concrete examples and examples that each can learn from each other of different ways of working, different ways of how it can function, how it can be successful, how you can get around local, very specific contextual problems, but also problems that they share. So I think that's something that we've done.
Okay, so I'm going to try and answer that one about the practitioners, because I'm a practitioner. I'm not exactly a researcher, although I've been researching this area to translate it into practice. And one of the things one can learn is that basically you can look at concepts, but because I am a practitioner, my first idea is, okay, how does this translate into practice? And so when I was writing the chapter of a book that's going to be published with João, who's the coordinator of Rural Move from Aveiro University, I came across the concept. We were discussing the impact of rural experiences and the concept of community, and I came across concepts like social capital. And okay, yes, bonding, bridging and linking, but my immediate thought was, what does this mean for for the project I have of rural co-working and co-living? How does it translate into reality? And I think it really is really important to make this bridge between research and practice. And so it's the best of both worlds. If I come here and my practice is very limited, but at least I have this mindset of, okay, here are these concepts. How do they translate into my co-working space or co-living or social space. And I think that's really useful, and I learned that from Coral, together with lots of things I'm going to digest when I go back. So many ideas that so many interesting people here brought that can be translated into practice, that can be applied, so we can learn with each other. And yes, sometimes we should also be talking about mistakes and failure, because it's really important. I've been through many iterations in my project. First, because something that we didn't mention here is that co-living and co-working is real estate intensive. It means that you need property. Whether you're going to use a municipal building or not, or whether it is your own property, it is property, and these days it's really expensive and it's difficult. And my first approach to this project was to buy a piece of land without any building, and okay, let's get an architect, design a project, and start. And we were hit with the Ukraine war and inflation, and so prices rocketed, and we had to shelve the project. So we lost money. So it is a long process. And this is still sort of ongoing. So I shelved that, then I shelved another one, so I'm on my third try. It has to do with mistakes. It also has to do with context. And these days, the world is a difficult place to predict. So you navigate with a lantern and you try to see what's in front of you, and maybe you can't see much more than that, right? You hold a lantern and say, okay, how can I navigate this? I think I finally managed to, the solution was to buy a property which is already built and it doesn't require so much building, work and construction. It's solid, so it needs some renovation, but then renovation is easier. But then there are lots of other challenges, and there are lots of mistakes we make along the way, and we really learn from them. And maybe we can also talk more about that and discuss that in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. One last voice about what we can or should learn. Oh.
I think, trying to summarize what you've said from another perspective, I think that the practitioner can also learn that the generation of scientific knowledge takes time. And because most of the times, if you have the facts, your work, you have a business, you have an impact hub, you have to take decisions in a very short term. So it's not like going for field work, having a theoretical framework, because we need theoretical frameworks to interpret facts and findings from the field. So it takes a lot of time to generate that kind of knowledge, and probably in most of the times scientific knowledge also contains the way to transform scientific results into practice, into results for practitioners, into results for policy makers. So probably we need to pay a bit of respect to the process of generating scientific knowledge, because on the other hand, we had some stories that the researcher goes to a practitioner. I'm not talking about Impact Hub now, other co-working spaces, and the reception is not that good because people cannot see the value of scientific knowledge. But I think that that kind of knowledge can change our mindset sometimes, and we can see things differently. So we need it.
Very much so, and I feel your pain, because that's one of the big challenges for roles like mine in impact measurement is exactly that. How do you make people understand that impact takes time? In a world where the word impact has been completely taken over by business, who think that impact is every person that you count that you have served, in their words, but really meaning every client. So it is very much the importance of being able to spend some time. And I think that is one of the pieces I refer to as well, of being able to be included in research projects rather than having to do your own research. Because that's something that, for example, we, in with our own in-house type impact measurement, we struggle with exactly that problem of time. Why? Again, because there's a funder that wants to see specific outcomes at specific times, although those outcomes aren't actually outcomes, because again, it's really only about counting the amount of people, and that's just about as much as they can take. So yeah, okay. Thank you very much for having this input, because that's all what I'm taking away with me additionally.